So last week we started Iggeres HaKodesh Siman Beis, page 206.
Yep.
Let's quickly recap what we spoke about last week. So this letter was written by the Alter Rebbe after he got out of jail, after he left Petersburg, yeah.
53 days?
Sorry?
53 days.
Yeah. I actually have to make a little correction over something which I said last week, which I realized afterwards was incorrect. I said that the Alter Rebbe left prison on Tuesday of Parshas Vayishlach. He left prison on Tuesday of Parshas Vayeshev. So actually he left prison already, it was after Parshas Vayishlach, so this letter was not written because it was during that Parsha of the week, because it was already in Parshas Vayeshev, but it was still somewhere near that time. So the Alter Rebbe left prison. He wrote this letter to the Chassidim, which is this letter is going to tell the Chassidim the attitude that they should have and how they should comport themselves, specifically in relation to their opponents. And the Alter Rebbe begins with the pasuk Katonti mikol hachasadim mikol ha'emes. And to quickly review what we learned last week, that there's two different ways of understanding Katonti mikol hachasadim mikol ha'emes. There's one way, which is the way Rashi understands it, another way, the way the Ramban understands it, and the Alter Rebbe offers a hybrid third interpretation. So Rashi says, Katointi means that my zuchusim have become small. Why? Mikol hachasadim, mikol ha'emes, because of all of the chesed that Hashem did for me.
Ramban.
The Ramban says, Katointi, I am small, mikol hachasadim, and therefore I am unworthy of all the chasadim and all the emes that you gave me. The Alter Rebbe learns Katointi mikol hachasadim means I am small because of all of the chesed and all the kindnesses and the miracles you've done. And as Alter Rebbe explains, that that's the way it works in Kedusha, that the closer you are to Hashem, the more batal you become, the more humble you become. And since kindness from Hashem, Hashem's chesed, is v'yeminoi tichabkeni, when we experience a kindness from Hashem, it's Hashem embracing you, Hashem drawing you close. So therefore, every time that we have a kindness, we have to become more humble. Just a small note, if you look in the first words of the siman over here, it's Katointi, Mikol HaChasadim, and Mikol Chulu. Which actually the Chulu is a mistake, it should be Goimer. But same idea. And as we've pointed out many times, that the Rebbe, one of the, you might want to say, signature ideas in the Rebbe's Torah is the exactness of everything in Torah. How everything is exact and precise, and therefore you can really draw meaning from every single diuk, every single small idea, every single small, what seems to be not such an important little diuk, but the Rebbe will pick up on that. So, in the first words of this letter, the Alter Rebbe says, Kotainti mikol hachasadim umikol gomer. So, the next words in the pasuk are umikol ha'emes, because Yaakov Avinu, what he was saying is that Katointi, why? Because of all the chsadim that Hashem did for me. Umikol ha'emes, and all the truth. What is the truth? Meaning that Hashem had promised Yaakov Avinu before he went off to Haran, when Yaakov Avinu went to sleep, and by the famous dream on Har Miriah. So Hashem promised Yaakov that not to worry, and he'll go, and V'hinei anechi imach u'shmarticha, I'll go with you, and I will guard you. I'll protect you. So therefore Yaakov was taking Hashem for kol hachasadim, for all the chesed that he did. And the emes, the fact that Hashem is emes, and therefore everything that Hashem had promised had come true. Is the Alter Rebbe over here, is he referring to the chasadim and the emes, or just the chasadim? So if he's referring to just the chasadim, he should have said, Kataynti mikol hachasadim. And then even if you didn't want to cut off a pasuk in the middle, you want to add a v'goimer, okay. So Kataynti mikol hachasadim v'goimer. If the Alter Rebbe was also alluding to the fact that he had emes, in other words, for whatever the emes means, that he should have said Katointi mikol hachasadim umikol ha'emes. But adding the v'goimer after the word umikol is strange. Why are you adding what is the word umikol over there for? Either you should say Katointi mikol hachasadim v'goimer, or say Katointi mikol hachasadim umikol ha'emes. Is emes part of what he's trying to say or not? So again, most people gloss over something of the sort, and they don't really learn too much significance into something of the sort. But if you're coming with the hanacha, you're coming with the understanding that every single word in Torah is precise. And the Alter Rebbe, whatever he wrote was precise, so this is something which needs to be understood. So the Rebbe explains that the Alter Rebbe also had Kol HaChasadim, and he had the Chasadim and the Emes. Obviously, the Chasadim is the kindness that Hashem did with him, that he was released from prison. And the Emes is that which it says in the Torah, that if someone follows the ways of Torah, the Eibishter will give them brachas. The difference is that Yaakov Avinu, he was told directly by Hashem that he was going to be watched. So therefore Yaakov Avinu said, Mikol Emes, with all, in a very clear and overt way. The Alter Rebbe had not received a clear-cut promise to himself individually from Hashem that everything will be fine. So therefore he didn't want to write Mikol HaEmes, he didn't want to write straight out that I had this promise from Hashem that everything will be fine. But at the same time he also wanted to allude to the fact that every Yid who follows Torah mitzvahs also, there is the Emes, the Eibishter guarantees you that he's going to watch over you. So therefore he didn't put in the word HaEmes, but at the same time, he does also allude to it by adding in the word umikol and adding in the goymer after the word umikol. So we have a Chanukah miracle. And that's Chanukah.
So is Chanukah.
Next week is Chanukah. Yeah.
I think say Zeus. This is.
We're holding on page 206. 11 lines from the top, where it says, V'zuhi gamkein midas shel Yaakov. V'zu, and this is also the midah of Yaakov. The Yaakov Avinu, just like we spoke last week, that the Avram Avinu, because he was chesed, so therefore he was humble, v'anochi afar ve'efer. This was also the midah of Yaakov Avinu, as we see in this pasuk, the Yaakov Avinu, because he was a recipient of Hashem's chesed, that made him humble. And therefore he snatzel al yirasi b'bnei Esav. This is why Yaakov apologized for the fact that he was afraid of Esav. V'lei dailoi, and he didn't hold it, it wasn't secure, it wasn't enough for him. Ba'aftachasei, Hashem's assurance to him, v'hini anochi imach, when Hashem said, I will be with you, chulu. Mipnei hayos katan Yaakov b'mo'id me'oid be'einav. Because Yaakov was so small and so humble in his own eyes, because of the abundance of chesed which Hashem did with him. Ki b'makli chulu, as Yaakov says, that with my stick I crossed the Yarden. He had nothing with him other than a stick, and now look what he has, all the brachas that he has, and therefore ve'enei royu kidai klal lihinatzel chulu. He felt that he was not worthy of being saved. Ukemaimer Razal, and as Chazal tell us, Shema yigre machet. He was worried that maybe the chet. Maybe that there was a chet which he did which will cause that he shouldn't be worthy of Hashem's Yeshua. Shenid mebe'enav shachata. In his own eyes he thought that maybe he had done a chet. So Chazal tell us, why was Yaakov, this is an obvious question in the pasuk. Why is Yaakov worried? Hashem told him, right? I'll bring you back.
So what he
Why did he doubt? This is what everyone asked the question. In fact, one of the Rishonim, the Rashbam, actually learns that it was a Chsar and Amunah by Yaakov, and that Hashem was upset that he had the Chsar and Amunah. The Rashbam was a whole interesting mahalach in the whole beginning of Parshas Vayishlach, that he says that Yaakov was trying to run away from Esav because he's afraid of Esav, and when he crossed the Yabok, the pasuk says that he passed the Yabok, it's because Yaakov was planning on, if you want to escape from someone, in the olden times you don't want people to see your footsteps. So you go into a creek and you can go down one way, 100 yards, 300 yards one way, or half a mile the other way, and then you go whichever way and you can't be tracked. So he was trying to run away. His going into the Yabok was to run away from Esav. So what does Hashem do? Hashem sends a malach to fight with Yaakov, and this malach dislocated Yaakov's hip so he couldn't run away. Why? Because Hashem was upset at Yaakov. Why are you running away from Esav? I told you everything's fine. Why are you scared, right? So that's the shit of one of the Rishonim. But at the end of the day, Pashup Shat, and the way Rashi understands it, and most of the Mefarshim understand, Yaakov is afraid. Why was he afraid? So Chazal tell us that even though that Yaakov knew that Hashem had assured him that he would protect him, Yaakov was worried, Shema garam hachet. Maybe he had sinned, and therefore he wasn't any more worthy of Hashem's protection.
It's very big emunah. Shema garam
hachet. But what happened there? So the Alter Rebbe is explaining that Yaakov had become even more humble because of all of Hashem's chesed to him. He had become, Hashem's chesed, as we mentioned, means a person being at a higher level, a person being drawn closer to Hashem, which made Yaakov more humble. And from Yaakov's new place of humility and his new place of Kedusha, he was worried that maybe he had sinned. And when we were saying a sin, Yaakov Avinu knew he hadn't sinned. Yaakov was one of the Avos. He knew he hadn't done a sin. But the word chet doesn't necessarily mean a sin. You had it, where Bathsheba tells David HaMelech, and Ani Shloima, that me and your son Shlomo will be chatoim. And chatoim means to, sometimes it can mean when you have a flaw, or when you miss the mark in something. We had it also recently in Chumash. I'm trying to remember where the word chet, and Rashi explains, chet is b'lashon chesaron. Doesn't necessarily mean an avera. So Yaakov Avinu was worried that he had a chesaron. But why was he worried? Because he was humble. Why was he humble? Because of all the chesed Hashem had done for him. And because of all of the chesed, he was so humble that he had worried now that he had a flaw. By way of example, the sun, if you were to look at the sun, which is not a good idea, the sun has what?
You can't look at the sun.
It has dark spots on it. Has black spots. Something to do with magnetic fields and gravity, but there are black spots on the sun. What's interesting is that these black spots on the sun are many, many, many more times brighter than the moon. If these same spots would be on the moon would be so much brighter than it is right now, and you would look at the moon, you would see there are bright spots on it. But because they're on the sun, they're black spots.
It's relative.
It's relative. They say that there were Hasidim who would go after the Rebbes. After the Rebbes would go into Tashlich, they would go, follow the Rebbe, they would try to chap the Rebbe's Averis. The Averis that the Rebbes would throw into Tashlich, they would try to chap. Because the Rebbe's Avera is my mitzvah.
That's it.
You know, the Rebbe's Avera is that one day, instead of learning 20 hours, he learned 19 hours. I'll take that Avera.
It's 19 hours.
I don't mind the Avera of that day. I probably learned 3 hours that day. I don't mind that Avera of the Rebbe that he learned 19 hours in that day. So the Chassidim, they were going and chopping the Rebbe's Averas. If you understand that the Rebbe's Averas are not, what's the Rebbe throwing away? He's throwing away. Rebbes don't do Averas. Elamat. There was a day when he maybe didn't live up to his potential. He had a chet, he had a flaw. But that flaw, that's a dark spot, a black spot on the Rebbe. On me, that's the brightest spot that there is on me. So what happened was, as Yaakov became more humble and brighter, he looked back and he saw black spots on himself. And he was worried that those black spots, Shema Yigre Machet, he's worried that now he won't be worthy of Hashem's kindness. But all of this because of what?
Humbleness.
Sorry?
Because he was humble.
All of this because of his humble. Why was he humble? Because of the chesed. Which is the larger idea that we're talking about over here, that in the side of Kedusha, that when we are a recipient, when we are the beneficiary of Hashem's kindness, it doesn't make us more arrogant and more entitled, but rather it makes us humbler. It makes us humbler and it makes us holier.
But why would somebody be worried about the black spots? It's like, it's very minute compared to all of his other milas.
But because Yaakov, again, he was so humble.
I think God would
he literally did not
protect him.
He was so humble, he didn't look at himself as worthy of anything. He saw that those flaws are so defining, he did not consider himself to be worthy of anything. All because of Hashem's chesed. The opposite is true inside of Klippa. Who Yishmael. What is the example of Klippa? Yishmael, who's chesed the Klippa.
But he used up his merits. That was the thing. That his kusim were diminished because he got all these chasadim.
And because he didn't think that he was worthy of anything, because he became more and more humble every single time that he was a recipient of Hashem's kindness.
But he had the Brocco from Hashem.
Right.
He heard the Brocco directly.
Correct.
So, but the point is that he felt that he already used up some of those chusim. That's why he was so katonti, because of that.
Right, and that's what Rashi says. And Chazal tell us that he was worried. Shema Gara Machet. But why is he suddenly worried about Shamagara Machet? Again, the more humble he became, the more he realized I have a flaw over here and I have a flaw over here. And ultimately, this is all a result of the kindness that he got from Hashem. The opposite is in Klippa. Chesed of Klippa is Yishmol. We know that Avram is Chesed of Kedusha, and Yishmol is Chesed of Klippa. The same thing is also, we have Yitzchak is Gevura of Kedusha, and Esav is Gevura of Klippa, which is very interesting. But we know that Yishmael and Esav, to a certain extent, they resembled their fathers more so than Yitzchak and Yaakov, because Avram was Chesed and Yitzchak was Gevura, as opposed to Yishmael, he was Chesed just like his father. Yitzchak was Gevura, Esav was Gevura, Yaakov was Tiferes, was a different midah. And that's why the pasuk has to come and say, "Ve'ela toildos Yitzchak ben Avram." Avram toildos Yitzchak. They look so different from each other. No. I think we spoke about this a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, Yitzchak was the true, right? The Gvura, he was the true one who followed his father, even though he served Hashem in a different form. But ultimately, he was serving Hashem, and Yishmael was Klippa. Now, what is Chesed of Klippa? Chesed of Klippa, Kol Shachesed Gadol. The greater the Chesed that Hashem does, Huhaylech v'Gadol, he goes and becomes greater and higher. Begoiva v'Gasus Haruach, and becomes more arrogant. V'Rechav Liboy, and so to say, the wideness of the heart. So that's Klippa. Klippa is entitlement. The more Hashem does for me, the more I think that I'm entitled. The more I think I must be so great. If Hashem did this for me. And this is something which is a very relevant lesson to our life. I mean, Alter Rebbe begins the Siman by saying, "Shebekol chesed v'chesed shekadosh baruch hu eisa la'adam." Every kindness that Hashem does for a person, sarach li yishfal ruach b'moed, has to be very humble. We're not talking about a great miracle necessarily. The Alter Rebbe experienced a great miracle, but Alter Rebbe doesn't say bechol chesed gadol, that a great kindness or a great miracle every time. And every single one of us on a regular basis, we experience Hashem's chesed in different ways, whether in bani, through in our children, or in chaye, with our health, mizoini, with our parnasa. And this is a lesson that we have to take to heart, that whenever we experience the chesed from Hashem, and whatever type of chesed it may be, so the desired outcome of that is that it's to lead us to humility. Yeah.
It's nes is chesed.
Sorry?
If you feel that nes happened to you, it's part of
That's
the
a tremendous chesed. It's tremendous chesed. But that means that Hashem is hugging you. Hashem is bringing you close. And when you come, and when you're close to Hashem, the appropriate response is
Why did I get it?
the appropriate response is humility. Because as we explained last week, before Hashem is kula kamei kalach shiv. The problem is, there's a pasuk that says, Ponu elai oiref v'loi ponim. Hashem's talking about a Klal Yisrael, that they turn to me their back instead of their face. When Hashem draws us very near, imagine two people standing to each other face to face, that is incredible closeness. But what if Hashem draws us near and we turn around? It's
like a coffee table.
Yeah, we're not recognizing where it's coming from. We're not recognizing. Then what happens is that the more we get, the more arrogant we become. Because we're not facing Hashem. But if you can be yasher yachzu paneme, if you can accept whatever chesed Hashem is giving you, and you accept it face to face, and recognize the closeness of Hashem, and appreciate that closeness, then what it leads to is a tremendous bittul, a tremendous humility.
Remember me when I was with my wife in Yechidus with the Rebbe for a long time, we couldn't look at his face. I was speaking up, I couldn't, I put my eyes down.
We didn't turn around.
No, he still looking, but we couldn't look.
Right.
But still today I see the vision,
Now this is, up until now, as you might want to say, the philosophy of the lesson. This is the central idea that Alter Rebbe is saying it. Now the Alter Rebbe is going to apply it to the reality of that time. Again, this is a time of tremendous exhilaration and elation amongst the Kahal HaChasidim, amongst the community of Chassidim. After the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, so now the Alter Rebbe is going to get down to the bottom line. And therefore, Basi min ha'imedim meidar Rabba, I have come to notify you and to give you I'm putting you all on notice. This is a very important announcement, Alter Rebbe is saying. L'klal Sanash, this is a message that was sent to all the Hasidim. Al ribuya chasadim, and this is regarding the many, many kindnesses Asher higdal Hashem lases imanu, that Hashem has done with us in such a great way. Lecheis b'mideisav shal Yaakov. The Alter Rebbe is begging his Hasidim, please, let's try to follow the example of Yaakov and the midah of Yaakov, who said, Katointi mekol chasadim, that the kindnesses should not make us arrogant, it should make us more humble. She'er Amoy, as the pasuk says, we have to be She'er Amoy. We'll get to it in a second. The one pasuk says calls Yidden She'er Amoy, another pasuk calls us She'eris Yisrael. And Chazal say in this Shemeisim Asmei Kishirayim, that when do we have a relationship with Hashem? When we're like She'eris, something which is left over, when we view ourselves like leftovers. U'moishres mamish, something which is completely dispensable. She'ein b'shum tzorech, that's not needed, like the leftover cholent in the crock pot after Shabbos. That's the way. That's why we have the humility of looking at ourselves. There's no that I'm not needed. I'm not anything. I'm garnished. Not a big important person that everyone needs me and I'm so important. We have to look at ourselves like Shirayim. She'eres Yisrael. Levilti rum levava me'acheim chulu. The Rebbe warns the Hasidim that their hearts should not be arrogant and should not condescend their brothers, and this is a clear reference to the opponents of Hasidim, who some of them had orchestrated the Alter Rebbe's arrest, and many others had celebrated the arrest. Don't speak arrogantly to them. Don't no gloating. A lishrek aleim chasasham, or to whistle on them. I guess that's an expression. In Yiddish, they say it's unpfeifen, right? Don't pfeif them on.
But Rabbi, he's talking about the Shiraim here. The Hasidim love the Shiraim of the Rebbe when he told.
It's a good point.
Well,
you jump on it.
There's a story.
You didn't see that 770 too much.
Not too much, no.
No, not sure.
They didn't throw them.
No. You'd see that by Bubba. You'd see that by the different Rebbe.
Yeah, was there one time somebody
Not
pushed
by
me
the-
just to pick up the piece of challah
You
that
wouldn't.
they throw?
In the early 20th century, the Rebbe Rashab was very close with one of the Litvish Gedolim of the time, a very famous Gadol. They were very close. They worked hand in hand on many different projects. The L'Toivas HaKlal. There was a chassid of the Rebbe Rashab. This is the early 1900s, whose name was Remendel Chaim. He was a rav in the city of Nezhin. A tremendous goyin, tremendous chassid. I believe the Rebbe Rashab once said he has 3 chassidim, and he was one of the 3 that he enumerated as chassidim. He was eventually killed al Kiddush Hashem. There was a pogrom in the city, and he led a delegation to go to one of the officials to try to stop it, and they were met by the goyim in the street, and they could have run into a church to save himself. He refused to run into the church, and he died al Kiddush Hashem. And there was once Asifas Harabanim, and the Rebbe Rashab was there, and this Chassid Mendel Chaim was there, and this Litvish Gadol, Emes Gadol, I'm not talking about Emes Gadol, and they got into a conversation on learning. And in the course of this conversation, this Gadol, he quoted a certain Rambam. So the Mendel Chaim told him that you're misremembering. The Rambam doesn't say that, what you're saying. It's a little different. And this Gadol insisted that he was correct, that he remembered that this Gadol is actually known for his charif, and specifically in Rambam. So they said, let's bring our sefer. So they brought out a sefer, and they looked up to the sefer, and Taka was like Remendel Chaim had said. So Reb Chaim looks up from the Rambam to acknowledge, and he sees that he had gone. He'd left. Remendel Chaim left. He left the room. So
They didn't want to embarrass him.
So this Gadol told the Rebbe Rashab, he said this, you should know that someone should chap me in a Rambam. My students, I have students who can also, catch me by a mistake in a Rambam. But that he shouldn't stick around to say, aha, that I don't have any students like that. I'm not talking about aha, even in a bad way, in a grubber way, but the satisfaction of saying,
Fucked them up good.
I was right. He says that's something which is special. That he wasn't so impressed by the fact that he caught him in a Rambam, but he was impressed that he didn't stick around to say aha. And that's really what the Alter Rebbe is telling the Chassidim over here, not to say no aha, no aha. Be completely humble.
Also, maybe he thought he'd be embarrassed.
Sorry?
Rav Chaim.
Yeah, and he didn't want to be there. He didn't want to be there.
Right?
But that's an incredible Midrash Tevis. Midrash, I think it was that Rabbi Salanter said that it's easier to learn the whole Shas than to change one Midah, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Midrash Tevis is...
Not so many people can stand it.
Yeah. And this, again, by the way, as we mentioned, this is something which is a theme in many of the Alter Rebbe's letters. That Alter Rebbe continuously asked of his Chassidim, he begged them, he says, in the Chassidim, many of them in many different cities were going through a very, very difficult time. I don't know if I mentioned this last time,
I think so, yeah.
that when the Masjid Maggid passed away, the Alter Rebbe got the biggest and most difficult territory of all the Talmidim of the Maggid. He got Lithuania. Lithuania was, when we talk about a Misnagid, it's a Litvak, right?
Yeah.
And the reason was double. First of all, the Alter Rebbe was a Litvak. The Alter Rebbe was the only one of the, I believe, the only one of the Maggid's Talmidim who was a Litvak. He was known as Zalman the Litvak, the Alter Rebbe. The Lubavitchers, when we speak Yiddish or we daven, it's like the Litvaks with Litvish
Havar.
Yeah, the Baal Shem Tov and the Maggid, they spoke Yiddish and they davened with a Polish accent. They didn't speak in a. How do we know that? Because we have letters that they wrote in Yiddish. The Maggid, the Baal Shem Tov, and you see that the way they write Yiddish, they write it not like the Lubavitchers do it, the way a Belzer, a Satmar, a Babaver speak it. So the Alter Rebbe was the Litvak. Did you know that, Moshe? If you look in Hatamim, the letters, you see very clearly the Maggid's writing very clear that it's the Polish, the Polish, Garish, Galciana, whatever you call it. But Alter Rebbe was a Litvak, so he was considered to be the best, the most suitable one to go to Lithuania and White Russia, that area, and to be the Rebbe over there. That's number one. But also the Alter Rebbe of all the Talmid of the Maggid, he was his goinus and nigla was beyond, right? His Charifas is goinus, the Rav, Shulchan Aruch Rav. The Kunter Sachem people till today they're grappling with the goinus over there, and therefore to be able to make some sort of inroads in Lithuania, there was felt that the Alter Rebbe had to go. So the Alter Rebbe had, a lot of the Talmidim of the Maggid had a difficult time. Rabbi Ditchev had a difficult time. There was a snagdus, there was opposition in many places, but there was no question the Alter Rebbe had worse than anyone else because he was given the place which was literally the headquarters. He got Vilna. The Vilna Goyen was still around at that time. So he had a very difficult situation, but the Alter Rebbe, and therefore his Chassidim were persecuted, literally persecuted. We're talking about economic persecution, social ostracization, physical, sometimes, Rahman al-Islam, physical harassment. And the Alter Rebbe kept on writing letters to his Chassidim saying, do not respond, do not engage in arguments and any sort of tit for tat and trying to do nekama. In fact, there's a letter from the Alter Rebbe, which printed not in Tanya, but in Alter Rebbe's Iggeres Kodesh, with Alter Rebbe, he forbids any chassid of making fun of misnagdim. You see today, by chassidim, by many of them, it's like a favorite pastime to make fun of misnagdim. The Alter Rebbe actually forbids it, and he goes to the point, he says, and I command that if anyone hears one of my chassidim making fun of misnagdim, please tell me about it, and when that chassid comes to me, I'm not going to let him hear chassidus. I'm not letting him into hear chassidus.
Wow.
That's how far he took it. Yeah, very strong. That the chassidim should be 100% completely passive and not respond.
Did they listen?
Apparently so. Again, it wasn't once, it wasn't twice. Something which the Alter, was there 100% listening? I don't know. But it definitely, what?
You weren't around. I
also wasn't around. That is correct. But I'm sure it had a very strong impression. These were Chassidim of the Alter Rebbe, and they listened to what the Rebbe said. And this was something here's one letter, but there are many. This is one of many this kind of letters.
It was repeated many times. It means that there were incidents.
Apparently. Okay, that's another way of looking at it. Or the Alter Rebbe really, it's possible there were isolated incidents here and there, and the Alter Rebbe felt the need to reinforce his message. Yeah. And the Alter Rebbe continues and says, Has mila haskir. I don't even have to mention this. Bazhara neira. I'm giving a stern warning. Rak lahashpil rucham v'libam. I want you all to have humble spirits and humble hearts. B'midas emes liYaakov. And the Alter Rebbe is saying, before we're talking about how Yaakov said kotainti, but the midah with which Yaakov is associated as emes. Alter Rebbe is saying, I don't want you just to act humbly. I want you to actually feel humble. I don't want you. It's not like you walk around with a smug smile on your face, feeling that you're superior, but you're only behaving in a humble fashion. No, midas emes liYaakov. The humility has to be with an emes. They call Adam, and before every single person, you have to be b'nemichas ruach. You have to be truly humble before every single person. And the Shlomo HaMelech says that a soft response averts anger. In other words, when you experience anger, respond softly, and have a meek spirit. And if you behave in this way, perhaps, who knows, perhaps Yiten Hashem b'leiv achayim, the Eibishter will put in the hearts of your brothers, K'mayim aponim v'goymer, like waters reflect a face, and as we know, and they'll be nice to you. If you respond with love and with calmness to them, that's how hopefully they will also respond to you.
I have a question, Rabbi.
Just 1 second. Rabbi Moshe, do you mind bringing me Masechta Shabbos? Yeah, go ahead. What?
We start the perek katonti mikol hachasadim umikol, and then the Alter Rebbe said v'chule. He didn't say the emet, and then we said he didn't say the emet because. So it took him the whole page.
Finally, he got to the emet at the end.
To the emet after the whole page.
Yeah. But anyways, you asked if they did it. Again, I wasn't there, and I'm not familiar so much with the historical. Did they listen to the Alter Rebbe? Who someone asked, right?
Yes.
Okay.
You asked it.
But again, the fact is that also, what I believe, as I mentioned last week, that a few decades after this letter was written, already we're talking about, this letter was written in 1798. By the time you got to 1830 or so, the Snaglus was gone. So maybe it's because the Chassidim Taka listened to Alter Rebbe, and that caused the Snaglus to go away. But it was relatively short-lived. The bitter opposition to Chassidus was relatively short-lived. Okay. And because tonight is Hanukkah, so we will, what?
Shabbos, my Hanukkah.
My Hanukkah. So let's see if we can learn something a little about Hanukkah and connect it to the idea that we're talking about over here in the... the truth is, I'm thinking, did I speak about this in previous years? I don't remember. I'm not old enough to remember what went on by the Alter Rebbe, but I'm old enough not to remember what happened last year and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. That I am... Okay. So the Gemara says... It's also connection to Hanukkah and also connection to this week's parsha. Gemara says, "Va'amar Rav Kahana, Darash Rav Nasan bar Minyumi Mishmeid Rav Tanchum." Rav Kahana said that Rav Nasan bar Minyumi darshan in the name of Rav Tanchum, "Mai diksiv v'haboy reik ein bei mayim." What does it mean when it says in this week's parsha, "V'haboy reik," that the pit was empty, ein bei mayim, there was no water in it. The pasuk says that the pit is empty. So any idea shem mayim. So do I not know from there that there's no water in there? So what does the words ein bei mayim come to teach us? It teaches us mayim ein bei, there was no water in there. There were snakes and scorpions in there. Reuben, I didn't know you're Baki B'Shas. But you said in the words.
It's a Rashi. Rashi quotes it. Right, Rashi quotes it, right?
Look at that, the humility. We're talking about humility, so he's being humble over here.
It's Rashi, not me.
You don't want me to do that.
Now, this piece that we just read is smack in the middle of the whole sugya of Hanukkah. The next words are Amar Rabba Ner Hanukkah Mitzvah Lanicha Betafach, etc. It's right in the middle of Hanukkah. So what is this doing here in the middle of the whole story of Hanukkah? So Pashup Pshat is because right beforehand there's another halacha which is also Amar of Kahana Darash Rav Nasan Bar Minyumi Mishmeid Rav Tanchum but Ner Shal Hanukkah, which is if you put it higher than 20 amma, it's puzzle. Now we know that the derech is that a lot of times the Gemara, when he brings up a memory, it brings up a statement of a not so well-known Tana, especially if there's a string over here, not the interesting string. Reb Kahana, and then who said that Reb Nasan Bar Minyumi Darash the name of Reb Tanchum. So since he mentioned it once, so therefore There's another memra. He also says something else. So they put it in here. You can say derech agav, almost by the way. But the same thing is also Masechtas, I think Masechtas Chagiga, if I remember correctly.
The
The
Gemara,
Chagiga also. You have these two also. They'll come one after another.
no, but the Gemara usually do that.
Yeah.
When they argue about something, say, oh, he said this, and go with something else. A lot of places.
So this happens. Yeah, it happens that the Gemara will bring down several statements by a certain Tana, or especially a certain string of Tanoim or Amiroim. But at the end of the day, this is not good enough for the Rebbe. As we know, the Rebbe, everything's exact. If this appears in the sugya of Chanukah, it's a connection to Chanukah.
Okay.
There's no, by the way, no such thing. That might seem to be the reason, but everything, it has to be that there's some sort of connection. That's number one. Number two, the Shalah famously says that the three parshias of Vayeshev and Miketz and Vayigash are all connected to Chanukah. All of them have connections to Chanukah because that's the time of the year in which it's read. So the Shalah in general puts down a rule that all the parshias of the year have connections to the Yom Tovim in which they fall out in. And the Shalah specifically says it about these three parshias. So this pasuk V'abayirek im b'mayim is in Parshat Vayeshev. So it's connected to Chanukah anyways. Even if it wouldn't be in the sugya, we'd have to say that it's connected to Chanukah because the Shalah says that every part of this parsha is connected to Chanukah. But especially since we have it in the Gemara, we have to understand the connection over here. So the obvious connection over here, and not the obvious connection. First of all, the obvious pirush over here. There's sometimes when you have something, everything there's on a simple level and there's on a deeper level, and sometimes the deeper level screams out of you. You don't have to be a big baldarshan. You don't have to be a big rebbe to figure out. When we say va'aboy reik ein bei mayim, mayim ein bei nechashim b'kravim yesh, ein sham but nechashim b'kravim. There is no water, but there is snakes and scorpions. So automatically the mind goes to where? What is mayim? Ein mayim ela Torah. And by the way, it doesn't say Mayim Zu Torah, it says Ein Mayim Elo Torah, which is a much stronger. Water is only a reference to Torah. So on a very simple drush level, it's tell us that when there is Ein Bei Mayim, when there is no water in your mind, when there is no Torah in your mind, then automatically there's going to be over there Nachashim V'Akrav. There's going to be snakes and scorpions there. There's a Torah from the Baal Shem Tov where it says V'sartem v'avadetem elokim acherim. It's a Vos Arivash. He says V'sartem, the moment you pull away from Hashem, automatically v'avadetem elokim acherim, which means there is no middle ground. There is no middle ground.
One extreme to the other.
You can't say my mind won't be filled with Torah, but it'll be filled with what's what I'm looking for? Neutral. Neutral thoughts. No. If Ma'im Ein Boy, if there is no Torah in there, there's snakes and scorpions. There's no middle ground. It's either you serve Hashem, V'sartam, you stop serving Hashem. What's the automatic? You have Avodah Zarah.
But I have a different view. Aborek en bo mayim, avar nechashim b'akim yishro. En bo mayim now, when Yosef was in, he was full with Torah. So now we have a lot of Torah inside.
The Medrash actually says in that V'habayirek en b'mayim, Nisroikna Boire shel Yaakov. That Yaakov's boir had now became empty from Torah because Yosef was gone. That's how the Medrash understands it. To the point that why doesn't the pasuk say that there were snakes and scorpions there?
Well, he has to go around about way.
The pasuk doesn't say it. The answer is, if ein bei mayim, then automatically nechashim v'akrav. In other words, in the way of drush, if there is no Torah on there, you don't have to go say, oh, that person, he doesn't have Torah in his mind, and instead he has Mishigasan in his head. He has negative things. You don't have to say that. All you have to say is, he ain't by mayim, and automatically we know that there's Nachashim and Akrabim over there. The pasuk doesn't even have to say it. It's the automatic result of ein by mayim. The Rebbe asks a question on this. We know the Rebbe talks about this in Mamarim, that there are various metaphors for Torah. Water is one metaphor for Torah, but there are other metaphors. Torah is also compared to lechem, to bread. It's possible, l'chu lachmu belachmi. Torah is compared to shemen also sometimes. And every single metaphor we use for Torah has a different, is bringing out a certain quality in Torah, a certain idea in Torah, something unique, which is why we have different metaphors. You know, we have on Yom Kippur, we have the whole Ki'anu Amecha. So many different metaphors that apply to Hashem. Hashem is our king, and He is our God, and He is our Father, and He is our Shepherd, and He's and each one of them brings out a different aspect of our relationship with Hashem. They're all correct. So if there's only one metaphor, that doesn't, it's missing out on the whole richness of the relationship. The same thing over here. The reason why we have different metaphors for Torah is because each one is bringing out a different aspect. What is the idea of water? Why is Torah compared to water? So the Gemara says, Mesechtes Tainis, as our Baki B'Shas is telling us, the Gemara says in Mesechtes Tainis, that Ma'amayim, just like water, is manichim, makim gevaya. They don't stay in a high spot, but they're always looking to go downwards. And makim gevaya l'makim namach. Also, the Torah, any miskayim ela me, I don't remember the exact words, but someone who's humble. Torah is only Torah only lasts by someone who's humble. So when we talk about Torah as water, we're not only talking about Torah, we're talking about a certain very specific aspect of Torah, which is the idea that Torah is only retained by someone who is humble. It's probably connected to that. Right? What's the connection? The connection ultimately is, because if we look at Torah, and we say Torah is wisdom, if you look at Torah and say Torah is, it's interesting stuff, fascinating, so intellectual and so profound and so deep, and I love learning it. Yeah, there are also other wisdoms out there. There's physics, and there's science, and there's medicines, and there's different natural sciences and astronomy, whatever it may be. Torah is another wisdom, just like them. Just like I can enjoy learning some other discipline. I can enjoy learning math. I can enjoy learning Torah. You can even make an argument that Torah is greater wisdom than all of them. But ultimately, that's only a quantitative difference. That there's wisdom to be found. Yesh chachma bagoyim, tamin, right? There's wisdom to be found amongst the goyim and in different other disciplines. And the Torah's wisdom is a greater wisdom. Okay, but ultimately you're defining Torah as wisdom. If you're defining Torah as wisdom, then you don't have to be humble to study Torah. To the contrary, you might even want to argue. If you're too humble, it's difficult to learn, because sometimes to learn with an idea and to grapple with an idea, you need to actually assert yourself, so to say. If you're just meek and accepting everything that everyone tells you, then you're not studying properly. But if we learn Chassidus, we know that Torah isn't wisdom. Wisdom is only the levush of Torah. That's the way that Torah appears to us. What is Torah ultimately? Chachmasei Ritzoni Yisbarach. It's the Eibishter. And Hu v'Chachmasei Yachad, as we encountered in Tanya many times, the Eibishter is one with Torah. And as we learn in the Gemara, it says in Masechta Shabbos that Anochi is Rashi Tevis of Ana Nafshi Ksavis Yehavis. Hashem says, I wrote myself in and gave myself into Torah. Oisi Atam Loichim, as the Zohar says, when we learn Torah, Oisi Atam Loichim. Veyikhuli, we take the Eibishter. Torah is a delivery system. That's ultimately what it is. Torah is a delivery system for the Eibishter. And that's why we say, Hoi kol tzamei l'chula mayim, if you're thirsty for Hashem, go learn Torah, go to water. Why? Because when you learn Torah, that's the ultimate connection to Hashem. Hashem is infinite. And our brains are finite. How does the infinite fit into the finite? So as long as you're arrogant, and as long as you're a mitzias, as we say, and you're not bottled, so that's a problem. It's a big problem. But if you're mevatel yourself to Hashem, so you're part of Him, and then your mind can actually contain the lakus which is in Torah. Otherwise, if you're not bottled, if you're arrogant, then trying to squeeze Torah and Hashem into you is like, as the Gemara would say, to try to bring an elephant and put it into the kupa de machta and put it into the eye of a needle. It's not possible. Torah is too big for you. But if you mevatel yourself, you humble yourself, then you become a keli taka for Torah and for the Eibishter, the Neishnat Torah also. And that's why the Gemara says, right? It says about a Baal Gaiva that Hashem can't live with a Baal Gaiva. Why can't Hashem live with a Baal Gaiva? It doesn't say it about other Aveders. It doesn't say it about a Machal Shabbos. It doesn't say it about someone who wears Shatnez. It doesn't say it about someone who misses Krishma. It says it about a Baal Gaiva. Why? Because your mitzias is a stira to Hashem. If your limited mitzias can't relate to Hashem's infinite mitzias. But if you're bottled to Hashem, then you're not a mitzias. If you're not a mitzias, then you're not a stira. You're not a contradiction to Hashem. So v'haboyrek ein b'mayim. It means that you have that there is no water. It means maybe you learn Taka Torah, but there isn't the water element of Torah. You learn Torah with arrogance. And if you learn Torah with arrogance, you can have Nachashim V'Akravim even with the Torah. Only when Ein B'Mayim. If you have Mayim of Torah, in other words, it's not only about learning Torah, but if you learn Torah in a way of Mayim, that you're a humble person, so then, Taka, your mind is a holy place, and you connect to Hashem, you connect to the Nois Torah.
And Nechashim.
And there is no Nechashim Nakravim. But Ein B'Mayim, if there is no water, even if there's bread there, there's oil there, and Taka, you can learn Torah, but as we know, unfortunately we know there are people who learn Torah, and they Taka don't have Midas Tevis. There are people who learn Torah, and they're Nechashim Nakravim there. How's it possible? They learn so much Torah, how's Nechashim Nakravim? The answer is, they're missing the Mayim, they're missing the water. To them, the Torah is interesting, it's fascinating, it's wisdom, it's wise, but they're missing the Mayim of Torah. How does this connect to Hanukkah? So this is something which I'm sure we've spoken about every year, because if you learn Chassidus, this is the central theme of Hanukkah. Now, what did the Greeks want? What was their problem?
They want you to learn Helen. Chachmas Yavanis.
They wanted us to learn Chachmas Yavanis. The truth is, they didn't mind if we learned Torah. The Greeks respected Torah. The very first translation of Torah
was in Greek.
In Greek, the Septuagint, Talmai HaMelech. He commissioned the translation of Torah. Why is that? The Greeks were wise. They were very wise. They were very smart. Pretty much the whole Western civilization is built on the wisdoms of the Greeks. We're not denying the Greeks were very wise people. And therefore, if they were wise people, they certainly recognized the wisdom in Torah. You know what it says in Torah? Ki chachmaschem ubinaschem le'eni am. That the goyim will acknowledge the wisdom of the Torah. In Korea, they're learning the Gemara. Right? You're aware of that?
No, yeah.
Yeah. Art school.
People, I don't know, art school, I know they learn Gemara there. Art school is translated into Korean. No, but there's some Metzias.
But they had somebody translate it.
Yeah. And why is that? Because if you're a smart person and people look and say, wow, and the Yidden are smart people, what's the wisdom? It's Torah. So Goyim recognize the wisdom. And the Greeks, no doubt, they recognize the wisdom of the Torah. But what was their problem? As we say, that they wanted la'ashkicham Torah secha. They couldn't get this idea that when we look at Torah, we don't look at it as Torah, but we look at it as Torah secha. We look at it as the Eibish's Torah. And we're always busy concerned with the nice not Torah, about the holiness in Torah, the Kedusha in Torah. And therefore, learning Torah comes with bittul. By the Greeks, to the contrary, they were arrogant people. Their wisdom made them arrogant.
But how do they see that?
Torah has to make you bittul.
Yeah.
You see the connections to what we're talking about in the Tanya.
Yeah. But how did the Yavanim see that in the Yidden over the Jews over there were learning with our neighbors?
They chapped a conversation with a Yid, and when you chap a conversation with a Yid and you talk a little about Torah, if it's a Yid who's learning Torah the way it's supposed to, it becomes very apparent to the Yid that he's learning be'ema, be'yira, be'pachad, be'yasas, be'zeya, and he's learning it as a davar kaddish, and he's learning it in order to connect to Hashem, and that's what they couldn't accept. The irrationality of it. Chukei ritzei you want to do mitzvahs, great, a cultural thing, beautiful, wonderful. But this idea of chukei ritzei blindly following the Eibishter with this kind of bittul, that's something they couldn't relate to. And that's why, what did they do? The Yevanim entered the Hechel, and according to Kabbalah, the Alter Rebbe explains, Hechel is Bina. Why is the Hechel Bina? In Kabbalah we talk about Chachma and Bina being Nekuda behechla. The Nekuda, the dot in the Hechel. Hechel is a big chamber. Chachma is like the dot, which fills up the chamber. Bina is the expansion of the idea of Chachma. And also the word Hechel, so the word is divided into Hey, Kol. Hey, as we know from Iggeres HaTshuva, Hey is Bina. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hey is Bina. And the Chaf Lamed is Begematria Nun, and Nun is the Nun Shari Bina. So Hechel is Bina. So the Yevanim, who were very smart people, they entered the Hechel. That was their issue, and what did they do? V'timu kol hashmanim. The Shemen is the Chachma. They wanted to contaminate the shemen of Torah, which is very fascinating. They didn't want to throw out the shemen. You think they went into the heichal, what would they do? They would pour all the oil out, or they would use it to cook latkes for themselves. No. What did they want to do? They wanted to be metamit. Because that was the whole war. The whole war was that we tinied that our shemen, that our chachma has to be holy. It has to be bottle. In order to be metamit. They wanted to be metamit, the seichel. They wanted to make that everything should be tameh, should be arrogance. And we won. Because there was a pach shemen, chasum b'chesam shulchan gadol. And ultimately, this also explains why it is that even though we have this whole Yom Tov over the fact that the oil lasted for 8 days, but l'chayra was an unnecessary miracle. Because we know Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. But the answer is, if we're to understand that really the entire Milchama revolved around the oil, the Yevanim were intent on contaminating the oil, making it tameh, because that was their whole point. Their whole point was, you want to learn Torah, you want to learn Chachma, great, but it should be tameh, it shouldn't be tahir. And the Yidden were absolutely insistent, no, on guarding the oil which is tahir. We can understand that if afterwards the Yidden were to light the menorah with oil which is tameh, you won the war, only to lose the war. The whole war was about the shemen. That was the war. The physical war was all about the shemen. And that's why the miracle had to be dafka, that the oil, that the pure oil lasted taka for 8 days. And just to finish off, that this is really all related to it's a similar idea, not the same idea, but a similar idea to what we're talking about over here in the Siman with Alter Rebbe saying about the importance of bittul. How there's something naturally which causes yeshus, which is when Hashem does kindness to us, the chasadim, which Hashem does for us, the miracles, when our natural reaction could be to become arrogant from this. The Alter Rebbe urges that in kedusha, the more gili, the more gili of Hashem there is, and the closer you are to Hashem, the more you become batal. And the same thing is when it comes to Hanukkah, and that's why it's in the Hanukkah story over here mentioned, because Habayir Rekein B'Mayim is really connected to Hanukkah, because what was really happening, what were the Yidden protecting was the Mayim of Torah, the bittul in Torah. And the same thing is also that there are many people who can learn a lot of Torah and can make them arrogant. But that's the opposite of the story of Hanukkah. The opposite has to be true. The more you learn Torah, actually the more batal you have to become, and the more humble you have to become, and the more midos tevis you have to have. Yeah.
How come the Yevanim left one shemen? They were metaming everything, and one.
They didn't notice it. It was hidden.
Was hidden.
Afriel Chanukah, everyone. See you, Mitzvah Hashem, next week on Zois Chanukah.